Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Woman on the Windowsill, a tale of mystery in several parts, by Sylvia Sellers-Garcia. Narrated by Kyla Garcia. Introduction, in which Don Cayetano Díaz opens his window. The first illusion that must be cast aside is that of the definitive truthful narrative. A historical narrative is a construction, not a truthful discourse that can be verified on all of its points. Arlette Farge, The Allure of the Archives. Every murder mystery begins with a body. Or it begins with calm, an impression of serenity that promises to shatter at any moment, when the wreckage of a human life is finally revealed. A corpse, a long enmity, a sudden flash of brutality. The disruption of that initial serenity manifested in death. Since the body that begins this story is never found, the mystery must begin with calm. It is the 1st of July in 1800, shortly after 6 in the morning. Despite the early hour, there is already movement. Servants have risen to make breakfast. The clap of hands against wet maize dough and the crackle of stove fires mix with slow morning conversations, gossip, last night's dreams recounted and interpreted, plans made for the day. Some have already left the house to run early errands, and their bare feet patter on the street stones. The zanate birds are loud at this hour, clicking and croaking into the humid air. Don Cayetano Díaz, a reputable surveyor and mapmaker, opens the study window of his well-appointed home in Guatemala City. The shutters, as with all buildings in this colonial capital, open onto the street, where wide stone sills offer perfect vantage points for watching passers-by. Díaz does this every day. He opens the shutters and then settles down to work at the desk that sits just below the window. On this morning, he realizes at once that something is different. There is a strange object on his sill. He calls to his brother, for already the object seems ominous. There are drops of blood on the sill's cold gray stone. Díaz's brother hurries from the house to seek a surgeon, Don Joseph Tomás Caseros, and as they return, coincidentally, Díaz sees another acquaintance passing by the window and calls him into the house. Don Narciso Esparragosa, one of the most renowned surgeons in Guatemala, indeed a leading figure of Enlightenment medicine in Spanish America, is making his way to the nearby hospital. Together, the four men examine the object on the windowsill. And now there can be no doubt. Placed on a lily pad, as if served on a plate, is a woman's breast. Narciso Esparragosa examines it with a surgeon's eye. In fact, it is not one breast, but two. They are attached, cut from the body in the shape of an hourglass. The one with less skin has been folded beneath the other. At the other end, the skin extends all the way to the underarm, with its scrap of dark hair. Esparragosa believes that the cut reveals no expert skill, and he states that he cannot fathom what has prompted someone to do such a thing. None of them can fathom it. They do not understand it, but they do understand that this is a criminal act, a deeply offensive and disturbing criminal act. The evidence must be recorded, and the authorities must be called. The court escribano, scribe and notary, Vicente Antonio de Villatoro, makes his own examination of the breasts, describing them in as much detail as possible. He notes 4 drops of blood on the sill. He notes a severed nerve and small discolorations of the skin. And he speculates, because of the darkened areolas, that the woman had been pregnant. It is only because of the coincidence of Cayetano's skill as a mapmaker that we, listeners in the present day, have a visual impression of what he saw on the morning of July 1st, 1800. Illustrations in criminal cases of this period are very rare. But Díaz had the colored pencils he used for his meticulous drawings of land parcels close at hand, and one of the officials in attendance must have realized that he was uniquely suited to depicting this most unimaginable piece of evidence. His illustration of the severed breasts appears on the second page of the voluminous records for the criminal trial that ensued, once the authorities were called and the investigation had begun. Díaz made a careful drawing, with such precision in the depiction of the rounded breast, the tuft of hair, the incongruous lily pad, that the subject becomes unrecognizable in its verisimilitude. We never see the body this way, mutilated, disembodied, and viewed aerially like terrain on a map. When I first saw this drawing in the archive in Guatemala City, I was flipping through the pages, not reading, and then I stopped, staring at the inscrutable cluster of shapes for several seconds, without comprehending. In fact, not until I had begun reading the case, lured in by the enigmatic drawing in the margin, did I understand what it depicted, and the horror dawned on me retrospectively. This is what it looked like. The horror we experience, realizing the fact of these body parts on the windowsill, is in some ways similar to, but in most ways different from, what people in Guatemala experienced at the time. The fact that Guatemalans were horrified is clear. Action was taken immediately to identify the owner, as they put it, of the breasts. More than a dozen people were jailed over the course of the investigation, and dozens of testimonies were taken. More than 100 folios were filled with depositions, orders, correspondence, and speculations on the part of the presiding judges. Bodies were exhumed. The investigation spilled over into nearby towns and villages. A special police patrol was created to lie in wait for the perpetrator. Guatemala City was horrified. But not in the way we are horrified. We are horrified in a manner trained by long exposure to crimes of this nature, fictional and factual. We have well-established habits of reading and viewing horrific crime, and we have well-established genres on the subject, which are at least partly devoted to spectacularly gruesome acts of violence against women. Through these habits and genres, and their depictions of such acts, we are trained to be both morally outraged at the misogyny and simultaneously titillated. Sometimes the latter is an explicit aim, but mostly it is concealed, wrapped in the moral outrage as something provoked, so that the reader or viewer can understand, and even enjoy, what is being condemned. We are also trained, culturally, through exposure to legal codes and expectations about human rights. We have a particular understanding of the idea of the victim. However unpleasant it was for Cayetano Díaz to be singled out, clearly the party most wronged in this case was the woman. That missing woman, so terribly separated from a part of herself. To us, she is equally a victim, regardless of age, class, or race. And less obviously, we are also trained to understand specific acts of violence as meaning certain things. Machine gun fire sprayed across a city street is not the same as a single stab to the back in a suburban kitchen, which is not the same as an elaborate death by many cuts under a freeway. We have our own language, with its precise vocabulary of violence. In all these ways, Guatemalans perceived this event and experienced horror differently. To begin with, not everyone could be construed equally as a victim. Only certain people could be the victims of certain kinds of crimes. While in some cases the laws did make formal distinctions, the most powerful distinctions were cultural. It was understood that an Indian servant woman could not really be raped.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?